There are a few things that I didn't cover in the first video that's about chapter 7, which is about adding images. So we're going to cover those in this bonus extra video. I know you've heard several times that the alt attribute is required, and without it, your HTML pages will not validate. This is a bad thing because you want your pages to validate, because that means that all the HTML markup is correct and the browsers can read the page successfully and predictably, right? So nothing will go wrong. So what if you have nothing to say about the image? What if you have an image on the page and it's basically an illustration, although you could say that? What should you do with the alt attribute? Should you say, well, I don't care if my page doesn't validate, I'll just leave it out? Well, no. If there's nothing meaningful to say about the image, if it's just some kind of like little decoration on the page, you still need to include the alt attribute in the image element, but leave the area between the quotation marks blank. That is, just have alt equals quote, quote, and nothing inside. You should never omit the alt attribute altogether. That's considered very bad. Okay, moving on to image width. Now this is a page that we saw in the previous video, and you've got an image of a giraffe that's 500 pixels wide. And then you've got a really overly large image, the same image, but saved with a different width in pixels, right? So at 1,524 pixels, this second giraffe is wider than my browser window. Okay, this is not so good. It means that you would have a horizontal scroll bar at the bottom of the window, and that's just considered really poor design. Now, the third image on the page is not too wide for the page. However, I'm using the same image, and I want to show you this in the HTML so that you can see this. So the first image on the page is the giraffe JPEG that is 500 pixels wide. The second image, the one that is too wide, is 1,524 pixels wide. The third image is, in fact, that same image. What is making that image not go off the right-hand side of the page? Well, some special tactics. First, it is wrapped up in div, and a div, if you don't give it any width, a div is going to always go 100% of the width of the browser. We're going to see this in action in just a second. The other thing here is a class with the name of special, and like all classes, that's CSS, so it will either be in a separate style sheet or at the top of this page. And what I put in special was a max width of 100%. Now, does that mean that the image is going to be 100% of the width of the browser? Well, yes, but really what it really means is the image is going to be 100% of whatever it is contained inside. And this image is contained inside a div. The div will resize when I resize the browser, and as a result, the image will resize. So let's just see what that's going to look like on the page. So if we go, this is the bottom image, and if I grab the edge of the browser and I slowly move that edge, I am shrinking the size of the page. Like now we're down to maybe tablet size. And eventually we'll get all the way down to something like phone size. And this image, unlike the two images above it, which have not resized at all, they're exactly the same. And even this one, as we go smaller, you'll see that image does not get smaller. But the bottom one, with the special code, it will get smaller and smaller until my browser can't get any smaller than that. So this is called a responsive image. This is the simplest way to make a responsive image. And the only drawback here is that by using this very gigantic JPEG to adapt to all the different widths that there might be, we're making the user download a 2 megabyte image because that's the size of this image file. And that's not so good. And one caution about image sizes. What you see here, and it depends on your video resolution, but the image on the left is the 500 pixel wide image blown up, and the image on the right is the 1500 pixel wide image, right? The one that's 3 times bigger, and it's blown up a little bit. But if you're looking at these side by side, you can see a lot of what's called pixelation. And that is like little square pieces of color in the smaller image, the one that's 500 pixels wide, but expanded to fill a bigger space. So you cannot really enlarge an image on an HTML page. You can't make it bigger than its real pixel dimensions, or it's going to look terrible. The third thing I want to cover in this video is to demonstrate what is meant by image is an inline element. We've talked a little bit already about block and inline elements, but what does that mean for images? We're going to work with this page, and let's look at the HTML first. All right, so the first instance of my image is the way that you've been putting images in your own documents so far, and that is the image element is outside any paragraph, it's outside any heading, and so as a result, when the browser gets to the P tag, for example, it has to make a new line because the P is a block element. So that's what you see at the top of this page. As soon as the paragraph begins, we have to go to a new line because of the kind of element a P is, and a P is a block level element. However, the next example on the same page has the image inside the P. So we've got the same paragraph starting with the same text, but after the end of the first sentence, we've inserted the image right into the middle there. Now you might imagine that that's going to look nice. You might have something in your mind that looks okay, but on the actual page, no, not really. So this is what is meant by inline. Wherever that HTML element is, that IMG element, wherever it is, it will, I mean, if it were small enough, it would come right after this sentence, but it's too big, so it starts on the next line. But then as soon as the image ends, that is, its width is finished, then the text picks up again. And it looks pretty stupid, right? So there's an easy way that we're going to learn very soon in CSS to deal with this. What if you don't want the image to just be sitting between paragraphs? What if you want an image to be wrapped around a paragraph? Something like this. And as the browser window gets narrower and narrower, you'll see that this image, the image doesn't change size, right? This is different from the previous example, but it is floating to the right. And as the browser window gets narrower, the text will actually wrap around it. Now, at this width, it looks okay. We could probably use a little more margin around the picture, but that's okay. But what about as we get narrower and narrower? So there's a problem with having a non-flexible width on this image because some of our devices are going to be narrower like this. Ooh, and at this point, you see that we can get into some trouble with this. What does this HTML look like? Well, it looks the same as the example at the top of the page. All right, so the image element is above the paragraph. It's between two paragraphs. It's out on its own. What is allowing it to float this way? This class. So in this case, I put different instructions into the class of special, and those instructions tell this image to display as a block, not inline, so we can change that with CSS, and it also tells the image to float toward the right. So even though this image comes above this paragraph. On the page, the image floats to the right immediately, and the paragraph pretty much stays where it would have been and wraps as necessary around that image. So this is a demonstration of how does an inline element work and how can you change it to act like a block element. The last thing I want to cover about images is metadata. And don't be worried by the strange word, metadata. That is data about the image. So metadata is data about whatever it's inside or whatever it's attached to. So photographs, right? There are people out there who make their living as photographers, and they get paid for their photographic work. So they want to embed basically their identity and their identifying information into their images. How can you do this? Now, you might be thinking, oh, I'll write some text very small across the edge of the photo. No, you can actually embed the information inside the image. So images allow you to add information, and in Photoshop, we can find that on the File menu in the File Info. And right now, the basic information that includes author and image title and copyright, that by default is blank. But other information, such as the date the image was taken and everything about the camera that took this picture, that information is all embedded automatically in your photo. This is where a professional photographer would embed copyright information and also caption information to help people later understand where was this picture taken and perhaps what is happening in this picture. You can imagine like a news photo, if there's some kind of activity going on with police or even a sporting event. You want to have factual image embedded within the photo so it never becomes separated. So I've cheated a little bit by skipping ahead so you don't have to watch me type, but this is a typical kind of metadata that you would include in an image. So the name of the photographer and the copyright information, and probably a URL where you can go to ask for permission to use this image. So to save this, we're going to click OK. And if we save the photo in the regular way, File, Save, or Save As, it will automatically be saved with the image. But what if we save for web? We're given the opportunity to choose how much metadata we keep and how much we throw away. If you leave it set to none, the information I just showed you in the Get Info window, that information will be erased along with all the information about the camera and Photoshop and everything else. So in a professional situation, when you're working with photographs made by professional photographers who hold their copyright to be very important because it's their livelihood, you're going to be careful in the metadata to keep the copyright information, probably the copyright and the contact information. You're going to make a choice to include certain information, metadata, and keep it attached to this photo so that it can be read within a program such as Photoshop. So that's it for the image chapter, and we'll be moving on to CSS next.